I'm Dr. Yashwant. So I've completed my DNB gastroenterology from Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, Hyderabad. So currently working in Bangalore. We'll start with the topic. Hope you will make a good use of it. So before starting constipation and fecal incontinence, you should be aware of the physiology of defecation because it has understanding it will make it easier knowing both the constipation and the incontinence. So colonic muscle has four main functions. One is delaying the passage of luminal content so it can absorb water. Nearly 1.5 liter of water is absorbed, and it can mix the contents and allow contact with the mucosa, the stool material with the mucosa. And it even allows the colon to store feces in between the defecation. That's nearly for 24 to 48 hours, depending on individual practice. And at the time of defecation, it propels the contents towards the anus. You have two types of waves. This will be discussed in detail when we are discussing the initial few chapters of the colon or intestine. So there are low amplitude contractions and a high amplitude contraction, HAPC. So at this point of time, what is important to us is HAPC, high amplitude propagated contractions. This is the one which will help in propulsion. So regulation of the colonic filling. So how does the colon gets filled? It's regulated by the IC valve. It prevents the colo-iliac reflex. That means once the stool entered the cecum, it won't enter back the ileum. This will not be there whenever someone undergoes ileal resection or IC junction resection, especially in case of TB or Crohn's. So there will be reflux of the contents in those cases into the small intestine and high chances of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it fills slowly when you are fasting. It fills rapidly when you are eating frequently. And migratory motor complex does not contribute in colonic filling. So just this is, I have summarized the long physiology into a few flow charts. So knowing it, like whenever you take a meal or when you get up in the morning or when you have a coffee or tea in the early in the morning, which causes ileal phasic contractions. This contraction will result in movement of the ileal contents into the colon or to the cecum, or to be more precise. And from the cecal filling, there will be HAPC, what I said, the high amplitude propagated contractions occur and results in propulsion of the contents. This occurs throughout the day, not just whenever you are, not just in the early morning. So always there will be movement of stool across the colon. In a normal situation, this is all Western studies, not Indian. So it says at around 11 hours, it stays in the proximal colon, and 11 hours in the mid or transverse colon, and 11 hours in the distal colon. In Indians, because we eat more of fibers, it is usually shorter. So the high amplitude propagatory contraction and non-propagatory pressure waves, this will cause the antegrade movement of the colonic contents, which results in successive waves which will be distal to the preceding wave, so that it will be propelled forwards. And this is occurs usually in a pre-defecatory phase, usually 1 hour prior, or depending on your practice, it might be early in the morning. Usually remember, the colonic movements are high in the early morning. So there will be some situations when you get up late on few odd days, you might be constipated. That's because of this. And once there will be increased frequency and a stronger waves, you get a defecatory urge, that's called conscious sensation. It will be usually 15 minutes per year to the uh, act of defecation, and this will result in sigmoid and rectal filling, and it will cause sacral mechanoreceptor activation. So you will have a defecatory urge, and which will result in RAIR. What is RAIR? Any idea? Hello?
Rectoanal inhibited reflex.
Okay, good. So the rectoanal inhibitor reflex, one second, give me a minute. So rectoanal inhibitor reflex is whenever there is a increase in the pressure in the rectum, which will automatically cause relaxation of the anus. To be more precise, internal anal sphincter. This will result in sampling of the content what is there in the rectum. So say if it is a gas, you will usually pass it as a flatus if the circumstances are okay. If it's not a gas, if it's a solid and liquid, then it depends which situation you are in, where there is availability of restroom or you are outside somewhere traveling. So this is decided by the higher centers like pons and medulla. So there will be afferent to the higher centers and you get the efferent if there is an appropriate setting or restrooms are available. So depending on your situation, ideally it is said the squatting is better than sitting because it's more physiological, but we don't have any studies to prove it. Okay, so this result in descent of the, I'll show you in a picture. See, this is in the rest, you have a anorectal angle of 90 degree, and this is a puborectalis, which is a modified levator muscle which will cause this indentation or angulation. So whenever you strain or whenever you intend to pass, this will become relaxed. The puborectalis will get relaxed and there will be pelvic descent, usually up to around 3 to 4 centimeters. And the anorectal angle will become more obtuse. Remember, more obtuse or more straighter, so you can pass the stool easy. Okay. So if there is no situation that you are traveling or you are outside, then there will be increase in the tone of external anal sphincter, increase in rectal compliance, which will retrograde the propulsion of the contents to sigmoid colon, and also indirectly it will have effect on IC filling, that is ileocecal or ileocolonic filling. It will delays it, and even it delays the gastric empty. Okay, so I said the anorectal angle, it's quite important. So most of the studies, it will be taken in the center of the lumen. Okay, and usually normally it will be around 90 degrees. In a voluntary squeeze or when you try to avoid it, it is 70 degrees. It becomes more acute. During defecation, it will become more obtuse, 100 to 130 degrees. The normal anorectal pressure is around at rest is around now somewhere around 60, and in on voluntary squeeze in females it can go somewhere up to 160 around. In males it can be beyond 200. So this I have summarized up in a table. So knowing internal anal sphincter and external anal sphincter. Internal anal sphincter is a modification of the circular smooth muscle of rectum. It measures about 0.4 centimeter, whereas external anal sphincter measures about 0.8 to 1 centimeter with thick. It is because of the thick expansion of levator, which is a voluntary muscle, skeletal muscle. So all the, as we know, the skeletal muscles are fatigable and they are fast in action, whereas the smooth muscle, the internal anal sphincter, it is slow, fatigue resistant, and it is slow twitch. And at rest, majority of the pressure is by the internal anal sphincter, which accounts for nearly 80%, whereas in voluntary squeeze, it is accounts only for 40%. But if you or if it try to hold it for a longer time, the internal anal sphincter overtakes because the external anal sphincter gets fatigued. Okay, the nature of the internal anal sphincter is involuntary. It's as the name suggests, whereas external it is voluntary and it is separated by pudendal nerve. And this is the Bristol grading. And Bristol grading, what we should know is the last two, that is type 6 and 7 suggest diarrhea, type 1 and 2 suggest constipation. This is true in the Western population. In the Indian population, even type 3 is also considered constipation because Geographically, we differ from the Westerners in the food we take and in our bowel habits. So few key points before going to the topic proper. So colonic lumen contains food residue, water, electrolytes, bacteria and gas, and bacteria represent nearly 50% of the stool weight and fibers of around 70%. All these highlighted are quite important. It will be easy for you when you go through it or when you are revising the video. And colon extracts nearly 1 to 1.5 liter of fluid, which it depends on the intact epithelium and colonic transit. If the transit is faster, it won't absorb. If the epithelium is affected, like in ulcerative colitis, it won't be able to absorb or act adequately. The colonic width of more than 6.5 centimeter at the pelvic brim on barium enema is abnormal. This is more of theoretical importance, or for in your entrance point of view, you can remember this, and it is associated with chronic constipation. Mean transit, it is said less than 72 hours upper limit. This is for the Western. We'll come to Indian, what is Indian population cutoffs. So coming to the constipation proper, in India, we don't have much studies. Whatever we have are institution-based studies or some surveys which are being done, which varies between 2.3 in Uttar Pradesh and to 8.7% in Bangalore. Okay. Any doubts so far?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. So coming to constipation, how do generally people define? So they come to your OPD saying they have excessive straining, sense of incomplete bowel evacuation, failed lengthy attempts, means they tend to spend more time in the toilet, or they pass harder stools, or the stool frequency will be decreased. So India, the average, they said the prevalence is around 50, but this statistics is multiple confounding factors. See, if you take the Western literature, it varies somewhere between 3 to 30%. Why it's confounding means, see, these are things which are being treated by granny to super specialist. So there will be homeopathy, Ayurvedic, so many people will be treated, and patient themselves will treat. So they don't seek the medical fraternity. So, and most of it, because of the financial causes, they might not seek attention. So once, if something like Western countries, if it's everything is insured, people might come more to you. So the prevalence might be underdiagnosed or underestimated. So classification, we divide primary or functional, secondary are due to any other systemic disease that I'll give you a list later. So this is the functional constipation. You guys are reading Schlesinger 11th edition or 10th edition?
11th edition, sir.
Okay, good. So there is a difference between 10th and 11th, since it has come just 1 year back. So it is important to know what are the differences, and they might ask you what are the differences. See, it on a grossly you look, both looks almost similar. So if you look in what are the parameters which are there, these parameters should be there for past 3 months with the onset 6 months before. This will be there for almost all the Rome criteria that will be there in your back of your mind. So what are the 2 out of 6 should be present? That is straining for 25% of defecation, hard stools for more than 25%, sensation of incomplete evacuation for more than 25%, sensation of blockade or more than 25%, manual maneuvers like digital evacuation which occurs in dysenergic defecation, we will come to it, and fewer than 3 spontaneous bowel movements per week. Loose stools are rarely present without the use of laxatives. Insufficient criteria for IBS. What they meant, hard stool is Bristol 1 and 2. For Indian, we can oversimplify it to Bristol 3. So now, what was the difference between these were, see, if you look in the F or the last point, in the previous, it was fewer than 3 defecations per week. It was not spontaneous, might be even with some laxatives. Now it is very clear that it should be fewer than 3 spontaneous bowel movements per week. Okay. Second point, magic number 25. So what it is in the previous straining for at least 25% means 25% was there. But if you see now, the straining for more than 25, all are more than 25%. So it should 25% is not included. It should be more than 25. That is 26 onwards. It might not be very important, but you should be aware. Next, maybe it might be for those who are finding it difficult to remember. So I just made a small mnemonic. So it is a Simba. B H is there like a Ranveer Singh movie. S for straining. I for incomplete evacuation. M for manual maneuvers. B for the blockade, feeling what you feel. H for hard stools. Three is fewer than three spontaneous stools. So for those who want to remember it easily, or else if you can remember otherwise, it's well and good. So see, I put few concepts in a question. So try to answer. You are not going to lose anything answering this. So, but it will give you a fair idea.
High economic
So,
status.
high economic status. Very good. So this is one of the questions which was being asked few time back. But the thing is, always people think this is quite common in the high economic status, but it is more common in the low socioeconomic status, low level of education, and low physical activity. All are low, and it is quite common in the advanced age, female gender, and non-white ethnicity. In the Schlesinger 11th edition, he has given there is a slight difference. I don't know. It's might be little change in English. Non-white ethnicity has changed to multiracial ethnicity. What Google gives about multiracial ethnicity is mixed ancestry of two or more races. I leave it to you to understand what exactly is it, but just be aware. So in women, why there is increased constipation, there are two things. One, it is reported more by the women, and the transit is significantly delayed in women during the luteal phase of menstrual cycle because low estrogen levels. So next question, low intake of fiber is associated with constipation. True or false?
True.
Okay. Anyone want to make an attempt?
True.
Okay. See, this is from Schlesinger, one line. See, taking fiber will help to avoid or overcome constipation. Low intake of fiber is associated with constipation is not proven in any of the cross-sectional studies. So fiber intake will help in constipation. If someone is taking low fiber, that doesn't mean they are prone to constipation, because there are a lot of other factors which are playing a role. So these are secondary causes of constipation, and you have mechanical medication. In medication, you should know CCBs and calcium supplement. Both will cause constipation. Acetaminophen will cause, and lot of other things causes constipation by acting on the motility of the gut. And we'll discuss if anything is you feel like significant in this, but or else I don't think anything more you should know in this table. This table I felt more easier for you to list out what are the causes, but what I want to discuss is these few. So one is rectocele. Rectocele, it can be asymptomatic or symptomatic. Symptomatic, usually how do they present is usually more common in females. They usually try to push the posterior vaginal wall at the time of defecation, or use the finger to manually evacuate the stool. So usually they should be managed symptomatically, or sorry, it should be managed with exercises in asymptomatic cases. Whenever it is symptomatic, should be treated with surgery. Other thing is descending perineum syndrome. When there is a excessive descent of the pelvic syndrome, it will not help in movement of or propulsion of the stool downwards. And whenever there is a diminished rectal sensation, which we see in dysenergification, there will be increased compliance, and the again you will have the dysenergia. Rectal prolapse and SRUS, it is what exactly happens is when the stool is hard, it try whenever it is I'll show in the picture. See, stool is hard. Whenever it is passing across, it might be rubbing or pulling the mucosa of anterior or posterior rectal wall and causing the mucosa to prolapse. This repeated prolapse will cause ulceration. It can be ulcerative or proliferative. Sometimes it can be mistaken for malignancy. Sometimes it can be mistaken for IBD and treated. So you should be aware of SRUS. The usually management is conservative unless it is bleeding. So the types, I've summarized it in the table. You have normal transit constipation, slow transit constipation, and dysenergic constipation. So normal transit constipation accounts for nearly, please don't overwrite on the screen. So it is for your convenience itself. Okay. So in the slow transit, you have 13%, and dysenergic accounts for 25%. So what exactly is the pathology in the normal transit? It is most often misperceptions. See, someone is passing stool once in 2 days is not constipation in outside India. If within India, even the patients who are passing more than once, they can come to you with constipation. It's quite common in if you see, once you come to practice, you will see patient, especially from West Bengal, they come to you. I don't know, maybe the food habits or the lifestyle, some changes. They come to you, they have constipation. If you ask how many times they pass, they say they pass 3 times per day. Still, they say they have constipation. Then you ask them, why do you think you have constipation? Because if I don't pass third time, I'll get headache. So it might be a psychological distress or the psychosocial things or stress which is playing a role. But
So we have seen this. We have seen this thing in West Bengal. So I'm a Bengali myself, and I've been a student from IPM. Sir, I would rather conquer this. And yes, it happens.
Your good name, doctor?
Antan, sir.
Okay, so if you are interested, you can do. We can do a study later. There are few things which I have observed. We can discuss after the class. We will not disturb the class.
Okay.
What I have noticed in the Bengal patients, why they might have this. Okay, next. Then you have increased rectal compliance. This can be on a long term. If you see, they have increased rectal compliance. In fact, they have increased compliance of whole length of colon. So if sometimes we as a gastroenterologist, you know what is the length of colonoscope? Any idea? It's an MCQ question. It's around 160 centimeter. Okay. So normally, if most of us will reach in 1 meter, and once we reduce without any loops, we are able to see it will be somewhere between 60 to 80 centimeter. We'll be able to reach the cecum. But sometimes this constipated patient will have so much redundant colon, it will take up whole of your 1.6 meters colonoscope. Still, you won't be able to reach colon. Cecum. So that is the increase in the compliance you see in this. So, and sometimes these patients, you also need to rule out whether there is some other things which you are missing. Okay, like psychological stress. And key complaint in this patient will be incomplete evacuation, as I said, and abdominal pain. And their colonic transit studies and manometry or balloon expulsion test will be normal. Whereas if you take the slow transit, it is because of the colonic inertia, delayed emptying of proximal colons, and few HAPs, PC, that is high amplitude propagated contraction. In these patients, you have to always rule out upper GI dysmotility and psychological distress, because often as an isolated case, it is very unusual for colon to just have slow transit. Sometimes you will be missing the whole GI, the transit might be less. So you have to make sure that it is not just the colonic inertia. And why do you think this is important is sometimes it might be the initial presentation of SIPO, chronic intestinal pseudo obstruction. People often mistake this for slow transit constipation and treat, but after a few years, you will see the patient has SIPO. It is not moving anywhere, not just in the colon. These patients present to you with infrequent stool and lack of urge. They say I pass stools once in a week. Okay, so this is what they present with. If you do a colonic transit study, it will be delayed. Manometry and balloon expulsion studies will be normal. In dyssynergia or dyssynchronous, see, dyssynergia, the word suggests, someone asked in the group yesterday, there is no synchrony. Okay, that's what dyssynergia. When the anal sphincter failed to relax more than 20% of the baseline despite normal propulsive forces, then you call dyssynergia. It is, or you remember it as whenever the anatomically it is a normal and with a normal transit, but still stool not able to pass, then it is dyssynergia. That is the easy way. Usually the key complaint will be frequent straining, and they will have digital manuring, so to pass the stool. This is one of the most important history you should ask whenever there patient coming to you with the constipation, because as a physician we might not be dealing with constipation and incontinence during our empty days, but as a gastroenterologist it's quite important. And it is also important if there is a recent change in the bowel habits to ask how much time they spend in toilet or washroom compared to the previous. And in this dyssynergia, they have normal colonic transit, and the balloon expulsion and manometry will be abnormal. You have to remember, in the slow transit, fibers and laxative will have poor response. So the pathophysiology, normal transit, still not clear. We need not worry. And in the slow transit, usually seen in young women, and among all the three types of constipation, closest is to IBS. And one of the pathology what they have noticed in the slow transit is the interstitial cells of Kajans will be decreased, and they will have abnormal morphology, and they even have decreased number of dendrites. That's why I told this might be a uniform thing happening throughout the GI. And most commonly it is noted in sigmoid or entire colon. And in the dyssynergic defecation, it might be learned behavior to avoid discomfort, may also have slow transit. Okay, so it is, there are other names for it: anismus, dyssynergia, pelvic floor dyssynergia, spastic pelvic floor syndrome, obstructive defecation, or outlet obstruction. Occasionally, rectal evacuation disorders are associated with structural abnormalities like rectal intussusception, obstructing rectocele, megarectum, and excessive perineal descent. Okay, so there is a criteria in Rome 3 and Rome 4 for functional defecation disorder, that is dyssynergic defecation. So in this, there was a slight variation, and they made it more simpler in the Rome 4. What was thing is, the second point they have taken out, so, and they have split the third point into two. So what you need to remember is abnormal balloon expulsion, one, second is manometry, third is impaired evacuation by imaging, MRI or barium. We'll deal with all this investigation in a little amount of time. Okay. And this, actually this I put it because since they have given in Schlesinger, but I don't want you to make a differential between rectal evacuation and pelvic floor dyssynergia. In gross and all practical purposes, both are same. Only thing what you might need to know is functional fecal retention, which occurs in children. What happens is, usually because of fear of pain or some scarcity, they tend to avoid defecation. They usually put the legs closer, thighs closer, and try to avoid defecation because of pain or any external means of fear. Because of this, the stool gets accumulated, and this cycle will keep repeating. After a time, the rectal compliance will increase, sensation will decrease, and they can store a large amount of stool within the rectum and sigmoid, and which will become hard or a fecalith sort of thing. Surrounding the stool, there will be a seepage of this liquid stool occurs, which is called encoparesis. As the rectum gets lifted up because of the increased compliance, the internal sphincter will get compromised. That's why they will have encoparesis. And in these patients, especially children, it is quite important to address the psychological issue along with knowing why it is happening. Okay. And I'm not going into clinical questions you need to ask, clinical picture, because entrance point of view, it might not be that important. And most of it I have covered in my previous slides. Only thing what you need to know is warning signs and symptoms, which you need to know, which warrants an evaluation or a colonoscopic evaluation. Unintentional weight loss, rectal bleeding, change in caliber of stools, severe abdominal pain, and family history of colonic cancer. These are important to know that any alarming symptoms, like they might have an underlying malignancy, which will warrant you to do a colonoscopy. But the practical point is, if you want to do any of the manometry or any other studies, you should do a colonoscopy before doing manometry, irrespective whether you're doing a upper GI or a lower GI. Before manometry, you should do a scopy. Next is digital rectal examination. So this is quite important as a gastroenterologist, because this will give us a clue which has more than 90% sensitivity, especially for dysenergic defecation. So I'm not going into detail what you need to look in, which is more might not be helpful for you in your exam. You can keep a screenshot, but what is important for your exam point of view is perineal descent is usually between 1 to 4 centimeter. When it is beyond 4 centimeter, it is called excessive descent. And digital rectal examination has a sensitivity beyond 93% and accuracy of more than 80%, especially for dysenergic defecation. Okay. And so how do you approach a case? Mild constipation in your day-to-day practice, you need not do any evaluation. You can treat symptomatically unless it is dysenergic defecation at presentation. So patients tells you that they have to strain, they have to put the finger to take out the stool, or they have something bulging out like a rectocele, or some bleeding is there. That time you need to evaluate, or else you can treat mild symptoms, then follow up the patient. During the follow-up, if it's not improving, you can evaluate. Investigation can be considered to exclude a systemic illness or a structural disorders of GI tract as a cause of constipation, or to elucidate underlying pathophysiologic process when symptoms are unresponsive to simple treatment. So I'm not telling the full detail of what all the investigation you need to do to rule out the secondary causes, because you doctors are better physicians than me at this point. And what your basic things, only 3 things which need to be done is thyroid, serum calcium, and glucose for all the patient. Other things, depending on what you suspect, you can do extra investigation. So how do you approach a case of constipation? So first, you have history and physical examination. If there is a secondary causes, you have to treat. If there's a mild, you can give a medical history you can take. And if there is a drug which is precipitating it, you can stop or change the offending agent. So once the constipation is there, you have to increase the fiber intake to more than 20 grams per day. But mind you, in Indian population, especially those predominantly vegans, we eat more than 20 grams of fiber, 25 or 30 grams, which is recommended. Most often, if you take more vegetables, it accounts for nearly 30 grams per day. So fibers, you have to assess the dietary history before giving it to the patient. Next, you have pharmacological agents. We'll discuss with it, and if it's not responsive, then you have to do anorectal manometry, balloon expulsion test. So why I'm telling you before is so you know the approach before asking for a test. So manometry balloon expulsion test, if it's abnormal, it is a defecatory disorder. So you have to do a defecation training consultation with psychologist. If it's inconclusive, you can do a MR difficography. Barium is not done nowadays unless in a resource poor setting. If it's that is abnormal, it might be a defecatory disorder. If there is something which can be treated like a rectocy, you should undergo for surgery. If it's normal, you have to do a colonic transit study. If it is slow, then you have to give some prokinetic agents like prucalopride. If it's normal, then you might have to treat it like a IBS. If there is an underlying psychological factors, you might have to treat. So this is the question: who is the following Indian personality has made a significant contribution in colonic motility?
Uday Ghoshal, sir.
Yeah, very good. Where are you from?
I'm from Calcutta, sir. Same guy.
Calcutta. So
Yes,
you
sir.
are aware of Uday Ghoshal, sir. He is in
Yes, sir.
SGPG.
I attended his lecture in Kolkata regarding IBS. That was, I
Yeah,
think, 2 years back.
yeah.
He is
So
an HGPJ HOD, sir.
yeah, very good. So I think he is also from Bengal.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He's from Bengal.
Yeah,
And he used to take some GI lectures in our institute. I mean,
yeah,
guest lectures. He was invited.
yeah. So
Every 6 months, he used to attend us.
okay, very good. So no motility conference in India goes without him. So why is it important? Because we have something called Ghoshal protocol. So before going to that, in the structural disease to evaluate, we have CT, MRI, and we can do barium enema. Barium enema in a resource poor setting or affordability is an issue, you can do it, or else MRI is the preferred modality. Then the most important is colonic transit study. So before subjecting patient for colonic transit study, you have to make sure that patient is not taking any laxative, enema, or any medication which might affect bowel motility or functions. So there is one is radio opaque markers. So see this we have in the all over the world, which is followed is Hinton and Metcalfe protocols. Hinton where you give 24 markers, and if there are more than 5 markers on day 5, it's abnormal, which says slow transit. In the Metcalfe, you have give 24 markers on day 1, 2, 3. You give orally. Actually, it is radio opaque things, inert things which won't be absorbed, and it has to be taken. Usually, they will be in a capsules form. So you give on day 1, 2, 3, and you take X-ray on particular time intervals. In this Metcalfe protocol, we take on 1, 2, 3. On day 4 and 7, you take abdominal X-ray. If more than 67 is there, more than 67 are still within, it is delayed. So, but we don't follow. You need not remember it. What you need to remember is Ghoshal's protocol. This is a very good study which done by Sir. So, what you give is 20 radio opaque markers. You give one at time 0, 12, and 24 hours. So, totally 60 will be taken by the patient, and you keep taking the X-ray at the end of 36 hours, at the end of 60 hours. So, at the end of 36 hours, if someone has more than 30 markers, it has more than 90% sensitivity and 82% specificity for slow transit constipation. So this transit time study are done to rule out slow transit constipation. Whereas in the radio opaque markers, if more than 14 are present at the end of 60 hours, which is nearly 100% specific for slow transit constipation. And you have wireless motility capsule, which is it is not done in India, usually in outside. It is a single use capsule. Sometimes it is a part of video capsule. uh, what is in the, it's something in the chat box. 1 second. Is there something in the chat box? I'm not seeing the chat box. If something is there, you can please ask. Okay, so sometime it might be a smart capsule. Smart capsule is like a it's a capsule endoscopy, plus it will also assess the motility. So with standardized meal, you give it this smart capsule with 50 ml of water. So if it's delayed, means more than 44 hours in men and more than 59 hours in women, which says it is delayed. So 44, how do you remember in men? I thought it might be helpful for you, M44. So easy way to remember, but it's not recommended for those with pacemakers, defibrillator, those with swallowing disorders, suspected strictures, fistula, or a high risk for strictures. And there is one more, colonic transit scintigraphy. So here we use diethylene triamine pentastate, or sometime the iodide, this charcoal also tagged with the radiological compounds and given. So it is measured with geometric center, which we need not know in detail. What we need to know is less than 1.7 geometric center suggests that it is a slow transit constipation. So this additional advantage of the scintigraphy is it should be able to give us gastric, small bowel, and colonic transit times. So this is, say for example, in X-ray, if you get like this, the marker is there in the cecum and most of the markers have passed out at the end of 60 hours. That means to say this is a normal thing. If you get an X-ray like this, where the most of the radiological markers are concentrated in the rectosigmoid, what do you think? So it suggests that the movement is normal across, but it is unable to exit from the lower rectum, which suggests it is a dyssynergia, or where there is a defect at the exit. But if you get something like this, where you have the radiological markers present throughout the colon or more on the right side, means it is not being propelled to the left side, which means to say it is very slow. It is slow transit constipation. So in the first one, the transit is normal, there is no dyssynergia. Whereas in the second one, the transit is normal, but there is dyssynergia, means the stools have reached the rectum, but they are unable to pass out. So remember, in what exactly happened in dyssynergic defecation is, see, there might be stool and patient might not be able to pass, because whenever there is a rectum pressure increases because of stool, involuntarily the anus might contract. This is the most common cause. That is, RAIR is absent in a manometer. So when this happens, it is called dyssynergic defecation. Very rarely you have, please don't write on the screen. So very rarely you have the sensitiveness of the rectum will be low, or it is not sensitive, so that it will become roomy rectum. So and very rarely the angulation between the recto-anal angle, paradoxically because of rectocele or other things, becomes more acute. These are the lesser or less frequent causes of dyssynergic defecation. In this case, since it is slow, transit will be slow, but whether dyssynergia is there or not, we cannot say, because these things have not come here. We have not checked whether there is a problem here. So probably in a practical point of view, you might have to take X-rays few days later or few hours later, so that once they reach here, do they pass or do they stay back there? Okay. So this is one more point I want you to know. Wireless motility capsule in constipation records all of the following except
speed, D.
Very good. Okay, so you can remember as PPT, pH, pressure, temperature. So speed is not there. Right answer. So this is the readings where the red says the pressure. The green, supposedly green, when it is in the stomach, the pH will be low, and when it is in small bubble, the pH will increase. Again in the colon, because the fermentation, the pH drops not as much as in the stomach, it will drop again, so pH will be low. And this is the pressure wave. It is almost same except near the pylorus, where it is the pressure waves are high, that time it will increase, then or else it is almost uniform. So colonic, one more question to you, which just I have put it these key points as a question. So colonic transit scintigraphy has been shown to be comparable with radiopaque marker testing, except in the descending colon. Okay, this is just a line from Schlesinger, which because we don't do scintigraphy in India, so we always do radiopaque marker. But as a for exam point of view, I have given it to you. So next, to assess the physiology of defecation, we do difficography, balloon expulsion test, and manometry. So all these I'll be telling it to you. So, but difficography has limitation because there is interobserval variability, patient bias, and the tech. Pardon?
Sir, this I just want to ask that radio opaque marker, can it be used to this mark the proximal small intestine transit also, or it is only used for?
No, it is not useful in the proximal small intestine. You want to assess the proximal small intestine, either you have to use scintigraphy or you have to use the smart pill. This will not help you because it is a tortuous course. There are a lot of overlap of the small intestine and the colon. So you might not be able to make out whether it is in the small intestine, colon, or in the distal stomach.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. In the difficography, what we try to assess is the rate and completeness of rectal emptying. I'll show you video, and it has interobserval variability, bias, and the technique of doing it. And you need to have a radiolucent commode for that if you're doing a X-ray based, barium based, and difference texture, because and the barium it should be standardized barium if you're doing, but there's no standardization. Some use the dilute the barium 50%, some might use the barium paste as such. All this will hamper your clinical ability to assess. So MR difficography is advisable. Then balloon expulsion test, I'll just tell you. So this is the MR difficography. So MR difficography, normally the contrast or stool will be in the rectum, and this is the anal canal. So this angle will be 90 degree. So whenever the strain is applied, this will become more straighter. If you can make out, this is the angle now, somewhere around 130 degree. Then the stool will come out or the contrast will come out. This is the act of defecation. Whereas in dyssynergic defecation, that is one of the thing I said, it will become more acute. See, this is the normal angle. Whenever the patient is attempting to pass the stool, it is becoming more acute. So the angulation is there, which will prevent the stool to come out easily. This is the time when there will likely you will have solitary rectal ulcer syndrome because of the hard stool impinging on this mucosal edge. So this is the video. You can see this patient having rectocele. Patient is trying to void. This is the angle, but it is becoming acute. She is having a bulge here. It will become more prominent. It should have gone like this, but it became bulge expanded to the maximum extent, then she is passing. So this is a rectocele. That's where this has an advantage. Next, balloon expulsion test. What you do is you place a balloon in the rectum. Ideally should be filled with water, but most of the center will fill with air. So, and patient should be placed in commode and ask him to try to evacuate the balloon. Normally, normal subject will be able to do this in less than 1 minute. If something, this is delayed beyond 2 minutes, or some people in our institute we used to consider 3 minutes, then it is impaired. And since India is a poor country where you can't afford to have a balloon for each individual patient, so it will be done in left lateral position. Since in the left lateral position the gravity is eliminated, you might have to give a traction of around 250 mg to 500 mg, okay, and see whether the patient is able to pass. Any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay. So next is manometer. Manometer, you have, see the catheter, you have water perfused catheter. This is how it looks like. Multiple catheter which has the sensors placed throughout. And this is the old one which is there in most of the centers in India. I think only AAG has one this solid catheter, but this is costly, and a replacement of this is going to be also be costly. So this water perfused catheter is being used in most of it, and this will be placed within the rectum in a left lateral position, and you will assess the pressures. These sensors will pick up the pressure, and which will be analyzed by software in the computer, and you will get the graph. So before going to it, what you assess in the manometer is resting and maximum squeeze pressure, rectoanal inhibitory reflex, rectal sensation, and ability of the anal sphincter to relax during straining. Okay, so this is the manometer. This is a normal one. See, in the manometer you have a pressure reading. So easy way to remember is blue is low pressure, red or black is high pressure. Okay, so if you have placed a catheter this way, so there is the proximal end or the distal end which will take the pressure from rectum, and the one in the anus will take the pressure from the anal canal. So normally the rectal pressure will be low and the anal pressure will be high. Yellow is little high, blue is low. So that's where the continence is being maintained. Whenever stool enters or the manual, you ask the patient to exert pressure, so or simulate the act of defecation. So he increases the pressure in rectum. Once the rectal pressure is increased, or when he bears down, the anal pressure will come down. This is what is called RAIR. So this is normal, and the stool will be passed if the stool is there. Again, once this act over, the anal pressure will come back to normal, rectal pressure will reduce. Whereas in dysenergification, we have 4 types. The first one, where your rectal pressure will increase, same time anal pressure will also increase. Okay, so patient is trying to pass from rectum and anus has more pressure, so patient is unable to pass. This is type 1 dysenergification. Type 2, you have, I have made a simple table for you, easy way to revise. So in type 2, there might not be much changes or slight increase in rectal pressure, but anal pressure also increases. See, resting anal pressure always is more than rectal. Even if it increases slightly, patient won't be able to pass the stool. Sorry, this is type 3. Type 2, rectal pressure will almost remain the same. Anal pressure will increase. Type 3, the rectal pressure will increase, but anal pressure will not be able to, anal pressure won't decrease. So the patient will have to have more stool to overcome this. In this, after a significant straining, they will be able to pass. In type 4, there won't be any changes in the rectal pressure or anal pressure, usually occurs in case of some neuropathies. So type 1, remember type 1 both increases, type 2 anal pressure increases, type 3 there is an inadequate relaxation, type 4 there is no change. Don't confuse, just remember this table. So same thing in a better graph. This used to be the reading in are you able to see my cursor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this used to be in the old manometers. This is how it used to be. The rectal, it used to give on a graphical way that rectal increases and anal pressure also increases. But now it is more pictorial, so you need not worry about this old one. What you need to worry about is this manometer. If you got the basic right, this is the same way which you can remember in esophageal manometer also. So there is something called defecation index. This is not from Schlesinger. So defecation index is maximum rectal pressure divided by minimum anal sphincter pressure. At least it should be 1.5 in needed to expel the feces. Okay, less than 1.4 suggests that functional evacuation disease or dysynergic defecation. So we'll come to treatment. If there is anything, you can please ask me. So what is the treatment? First, see, sometimes we just discussed that how do the West Bengal few patients present to us. So in those cases, it's just the reassurance. You have to say that there is nothing wrong with your bowel. It is might be the stressor factors which you might need to address. Then the lifestyle changes. One is the posture. Posture, it said that squatting is better. If not possible in the Western commode, what you can do is you can give a small what you call support, which is of around 6-inch small stool, something that sort, so that the angle will become your angle between your stomach plane and the thigh will be less. So, and it mimics more physiological. And psychological support, as we discussed, and fluid intake, that should also be noted, because adequate at least of around 2 to 3 liters should be ensured. Fiber, I said, fiber is important in Western population. In Indian, it might not hold such good. Two reasons. One, we might be taking adequate fiber before itself. Second, most of this fiber supplement like Isabgol will have little bloating. Most of this patient might have bloating also. In these patients, if you give something like fiber, in fact, you worsen the things. What you need to know about Isabgol is it can cause acute IgE mediated response, which is important to note. And this is known or mainly from India. So we have multiple supplements. So you need to know is these supplements, what they have done is fiber, they have Isabgol with osmotic laxative, they have combined. So most of them are like that, or some might be just osmotic supplement like Pegret. So this is a question for you. A 58-year-old was diagnosed to have type 2 diabetic mellitus during his annual checkup in August 2020. This was patient presented to me. Patient now presented with complaints of loose stools 3 to 5 times per day, water inconsistency with no associated symptoms.
Sir, autonomic neuropathy.
Okay. Why do you think so?
HbA1c is 6.8.
Diabetes well controlled, so
well controlled. Yeah, you're right. So if I put you the question, if the patient has uncontrolled diabetes for 10 years, then I would have taken...
Then autonomic neuropathy, yes, sir.
Yeah, then autonomic neuropathy, you would have been right. And even SIBO would have been right. This, that's where the question you have to read carefully is on his annual checkup, means on his previous annual checkup, it was normal. On this annual checkup, he was diagnosed to be diabetic. That is newly diagnosed diabetic, well controlled. Then the autonomic neuropathy is very unlikely. And even SIBO is very unlikely. What you need to check is the OHA and sugar-free supplement. Most of this sugar-free supplement will have sorbitol. Sorbitol is also osmotic laxative, which can cause diarrhea. Important thing. Okay. And second is OHA, metformin. This also causes increased frequency of stools. Sometimes can be confused with defecation. So this is, please keep these two things in mind. And this patient who came to me was on metformin, which was causing. On changing the drug, he was doing well. Okay, this is just to bring the concept to you. So next question is, which of the following about lactulose is true? Lactulose 20 gram is 30 ml. Time to onset of action is 2 to 3 days to achieve an effect. Effectiveness of lactulose is dose dependent, and all of the above. Sorry, I am unable to see you. I'll just come out of sharing and reshare with you. So answer is all of the above. Okay, because lactulose causes, normally someone write lactulose, they write the dose 20 grams of lactulose, or usually write 30 ml. So what is recommended is per time it is 30 ml or 20 gram, don't get confused. And it takes around 2 to 3 days to achieve an effect. And is there any difference between lactulose and lactitol? Anyone want to make an attempt? Okay, so both are almost similar, but lactulose causes more bloating sensation. That is why sometimes lactitol is preferred. And there is a theoretical thing whenever in a patient is a hepatic encephalopathy, whenever you are giving antibiotic, lactulose might not be metabolized. That's what they say. Lactitol will be better, but it's theoretical. Studies have failed to prove the benefit of lactitol over lactulose. Okay, so coming to the treatment. So treatment, other than fibers, we have osmotic laxatives. I just highlight you what are the important things you need to remember. We have magnesium as hydroxide, citrate, and sulfate. What you need to know is hypermagnesemia is features in renal failure and children. That is one point you need to concentrate on. Second, you have sulfate and phosphates, but often these are not used in a clinical practice. Then there is a poorly absorbed sugar. I told you lactulose and lactitol, but these are known to cause gas or bloating as a common side effects. So you have to see whether the patient is any of these. Then sorbitol, I told you, as a sweetener in sugar-free products, it is used. Next is PEG. PEG causes less bloating compared to lactulose, and even sometimes it acts as a better than lactulose in few patients for unknown reasons. So you can use in those conditions. So next we have stimulant laxative, anthraquinolones. These anthraquinolones usually causes apoptosis of colonic epithelial cells, and these are engulfed by macrophages. In a long run, these will cause accumulation of pigment. It is called lipofuscin, which will give a melanosis, pseudomelanosis coli. So melanosis is a misnomer. It is not melanin, it is lipofuscin. Please remember, this can be a question. And you have cascara or senna. Senna is churna, churnam, whatever is being called in Ayurveda or other things. It's a stimulant laxative. Okay. Next, you have castor oil, commonly used in southern India for laxative or for Ayurveda for laxative purposes. And you have bisacodyl, sodium picosulfate, which are also very good stimulant laxatives. And stool softeners, not much used. Mineral oil, not much used. As a practical tip, unless patient, if you rule out patient with dysenergic defecation, the fibers might or osmotic won't help in a slow transit constipation. Or in the general chunk, in a normal transit constipation, for you as a practical purpose, you can try any of the these stimulant or osmotic laxatives. But if they don't work, what you have to do is a combination. When you are combining, please put some logic. The logic is, or the whatever the being, it is not given in the books. So you have to combine stimulant with a fiber, or a stimulant with a bulk, or stimulant with a osmotic. Okay, that is the normal this thing. Second step in the going ahead. Next, you have enemas. Enemas, I think you are aware, but Few enemas like soap water enema causes a lot of irritation to the mucosa, preferably should be avoided. And if you're planning for colonoscopy or a sigmoidoscopy, this some unprescribed enemas should be avoided because this irritation itself can mimic a colitis. Next, you have chloride channel activator, lubiprostone. I think this question was being asked in this recent 2020 NEET. Okay, so what you need to remember is the dosage is in the form of multiples of 8, 16, 24, usually BD, and it should be avoided in case of pregnancy and breastfeeding. Linaclotide, which is a guanylate cyclase C, most common adverse effect is diarrhea. There is one more newer one which was not there in the previous edition, was pliclanatide. Okay, and you have 5-HT4 agonist. This is more useful, especially in a slow transit constipation. This is a pan prokinetic, prucalopride, means even from upper GI it helps slow transit even in colon. Then sodium hydrogen inhibitor, sodium absorption inhibitor is tinapenor. So these are little tongue twister and newer drugs. Please go through it. These are other than prucalopride, lubiprostone. Most of these are not available in day-to-day practice. And then there is a newer drugs which are being added in the 11th edition, which was not there in your previous or what we read in the 10th edition, or elobixibat, which is ileal bile acid transport inhibitor. Then relamorelin, which is a pentapeptide selective agonist of ghrelin receptor. Then veleustrag, which is a 5-HT4 full 5-HT4 agonist. Veleustrag, relamorelin, and elobixibat, if I am pronouncing right. Remember these three, important. So as I said, I told you that as a treatment you give laxatives. After laxative, next in case of dysenergification is a biofeedback. What is biofeedback is just like doing a manometer again. You place the transducer in the lower GIT and you ask the patient to squeeze. Okay, so or mimic act of defecation. When they mimic, usually they'll have increase in rectal pressure, increase in anal pressure, like in a typical type 1 which we discussed. That is the most common. So you have to tell the patient, usually what you get is, here you get a black because the pressure will be very high, and here you get a red. So that is when that dysenergic, typical dysenergic. You tell the patient that you are pressurizing both. Ask him to relax, ask him to pressurize this and not to pressurize here. So with learning, he will pressurize in the rectum without pressurizing in the anal. This is just like giving a feedback. Here you are telling auditory, means you are telling not to do this, and even visual. The monitor will be in front of the patient and he'll try to avoid the increase in the pressure in anus. This repeating the cycles, usually 6 sessions in 6 weeks or 3 sessions per day for 10 consecutive days is the ideally prescribed, but there is no set protocol. This will help to come out of the dysenergification. The results are very good. Only thing with this is there is a lot of time, your time to make the patient understand and patient also to be understand, because this require a minimal intelligence to understand for patient also. Okay, and you can use even balloon and silicone filled artificial stool to emphasize this more. And this is not much effective in those patients with descending perineal syndrome or those with spastic pelvic floor disorders. Surgery in constipation, especially refractory constipation, is usually avoided or usually reserved for those who are very refractory to any of these measures we discussed so far. And this surgery is usually taken for those with pseudo obstruction, psychological disturbance and dysfunction should be avoided, because these won't have a good result. Because when there is a SIPO, chronic intestinal pseudo obstruction, there won't be food or stool reaching the small intestine per se. So there is no point in doing a surgery in these patients, and this require a long-term complaint from the patient, and it is aesthetically not preferred if you have a stoma bag. And but lot of these patients would have suffered so much that they will be ready for this procedure, but a proper counseling is preferred. Only procedure which is named you need to remember is stapled transanal rectal resection, STAR procedure, with some success is being done, or else it is colostomy or ileostomy which is being done. So question to you is, either you can put it in the chat box, or you can tell it to me. All of the following are observed during anorectal manometry for normal subjects, except RAIR, positive rectoanal gradient, maximized squeeze pressure, negative rectoanal gradient.
D, negative rectoanal gradient.
Very good. See, RAIR, you see, I told you that rectum pressure increases, anal pressure decreases. You have positive, that is also called positive rectoanal gradient, and you can also measure maximum squeeze pressure. Negative rectoanal gradient you don't get to see in a normal subject usually. Okay. Correct answer. Which of the following is a, these are we are done with the constipation. We just brush through few MCQs so that few concepts are clear. Which of the following is a risk factor for, all of you can unmute and
advanced age.
Advanced age.
Very good. So which of the following best describe normal transit constipation?
A, incomplete evacuation and abdominal pain.
Very good, very good. What does B suggest? Infrequent bowel movements?
Slow transit.
Defecation disorder, sir.
Yes, or dysynergic defecation. What is, sorry, this is slow transit constipation.
Yes, sir.
B suggests slow transit constipation. What does C suggest?
Frequent straining is dysynergy, yes, sir.
Yes, very good. And what does D suggest is normal? What does E suggest?
IBS.
Very good, very good. Second. So this is a question. One of you can read, if it's okay, or you want me to read? Okay, let me read. 32-year-old woman with no medical issues. She's complaining of constipation 6 months. She is mentions having bowel movements every 2 to 3 weeks and needs to strain to have bowel movement. She feels bloated and mentioned that constipation has been having a negative impact on her life. Her diet includes more than 30 grams of soluble fiber per day, drinks at least 2 liters of water per day, and exercise regularly. Her father died of colon cancer 70 years back. Rectal examination is normal. The rest of her physical examination is unremarkable. What is the next best step in the management?
A.
Yeah, very good. So when should be the screening for her colonic? No, this is out of topic. Just I'm asking.
50 years.
Huh? 40 years. Usually it should start at the age of 40 years. When someone has first degree relative has died beyond 60 years, it should start at the age of 40 years. So you are right. It is A, PEG, polyethylene glycol should be given. So next question. 55-year-old woman with complaints of hard stools, difficulty in bowel movements 5 years. She has to strain for a long time, perform digital evacuation every time, and a sensation of incomplete evacuation. So what type of constipation she has?
Dysynergy.
Very good. So she had a normal colonoscopy and TSH is normal. She has tried multiple prescription with no benefit. Balloon expulsion test, she could not expel the balloon at 2 minutes. Manometry tracing during balloon expulsion revealed simultaneous increase in rectal and anal pressure, that is RAIR absent. Which of the following is the next step in the management of this condition?
Biofeedback, sir.
Very good. Biofeedback is the next step. And mind you, others might not give any result in case of dysenergetification. Biofeedback has nearly 60 to 80% result depending on studies. Next, 38-year-old man seen in clinic with complaints of blood and mucus, and he has a bowel movements once or twice a week and has to strain during defecation. He is sexually active. Rectal examination revealed small external hemorrhoid, and tender rectal examination colonoscopy revealed there is an ulcer with erythema and hyperemia, small polypoidal lesion over the anterior rectal wall. Biopsies were performed, revealed collagen infiltration of lamina propria. What is your diagnosis?
Prolapse.
Huh?
Rectal prolapse. See.
Prolapse.
No, that is the answer. What is the diagnosis?
Solitary rectal ulcer syndrome, SRUS.
Yeah, very good. So whenever, if they give you, while taking biopsy, it gives a gritty sensation, it is always SRUS, where you have increased collagen in the lamina propria. So answer here, which has caused for that is, sorry, it is rectal prolapse. What you said is right. It is marked wrong. Okay. So the question is, what is marked in the red? What is your answer, which I didn't cover, so that it will come in the MCQ?
So the absence of rectorenal inhibitory reflex.
Right. That's the. So whenever, especially in the young or early adulthood, if you have RAIR, you should always rule out Hirschsprung disease. How do you take biopsy in Hirschsprung disease?
Suction biopsy, sir.
Very good. Okay. What is the mechanism of action of linaclotide?
B.
A.
B.
Yeah.
B, sir.
B. Right. B is correct answer. So, which drug acts in this pathway?
Lubiprostone.
Yeah. Which drug is a mu receptor antagonist used in constipation?
Methyl naltrexone, albumin.
Okay. Where do you give methyl naltrexone? Where do you give albumin?
So methyl naltrexone is used for opioid-induced constipation, whereas albumin is used in post-op cases of surgery.
Yes. And there's one more, I think we can discuss this question. What is narcotic bowel and what is narcotic bowel syndrome? So narcotic bowel is what you said, because of the long-term opioids. If someone has constipation, where you use methyl naltrexone. Narcotic bowel syndrome is giving opioid will cause abdominal pain. That is called narcotic bowel syndrome. Okay. Which is the 5-HT4 agonist we discussed?
Vodalopide.
Yeah. E. Ileal bile acid transport inhibitor.
Ileobixabat.
Very good. So these are from the review, Schlesinger review itself, the questions. So this we discussed. I think the answer here is methyl naltrexone. So according to this, won't come in your question, entrance, but just to know, American College of Gastroenterology, which drug has grade A evidence? It is PEG and lactulose. Okay. So this is a patient with rectocele. She is using digital. She is symptomatic. What should be your treatment?
Surgery for any symptomatic.
Yes, very good. So we are done with constipation. I have some 35 slides on fecal incontinence. You have any doubt or anything you want to make it clear in the constipation? So what we have discussed is the first is the physiology. In the physiology, how the act of defecation occurs. I'm just summarizing up so that you just revise. Act of defecation, then the internal external anal sphincter, then we came to the constipation proper. Constipation, we said what will the percentage, why it is underestimated in the Indian population, and what is primary, secondary causes. In the primary, what are the three subtypes? Normal transit, slow transit, and dysenergification. What is the percentage? Around 60%, 15%, and 25% is the distribution. And what is the pathophysiology, and how what will be the findings on MRI, or what are the findings on transit studies. Then we discussed how what is a transit study, what are the things we do. The most common is the radio opaque marker. Then we have smart capsule, wireless capsule, and third one is nucleotide scintigraphy. And we discussed the advantage of each of it. Then we discussed the Ghoshals protocol, which is commonly followed in India. Then we came to the structural images. Also, we discussed MRI and this thing. And also we discussed difficography, how it is being done. Then we discussed about manometry, what is normal, how is pressure, which color denotes what, how is it being done, and what are the 4 types of dysenergification based on manometry. That's quite important. Then lastly, we discussed how we should approach. Also, we discussed before going into it, so that we'll have an idea. In general, I will summarize how is the approach. Any patient with constipation, take a good history. If there is any secondary causes, treat it. Any drugs causing it, stop it. If it's a mild constipation, treat. If you have ruled out dysenergification, mild constipation, treat with either bulk osmotic laxatives or secretory laxatives. Secretory is lubiprostone or linaclotide. So if the patient is responding, you can wait. If not responding, you can use a combination. If still not responding, you have to evaluate the patient. Evaluation you have for imaging, manometry, and you have the difficography action. How do you act of defecation? How do you observe? Depending on the patient, you have to choose. And if it's a dysenergification, nothing works. What works is biofeedback therapy. If it is a normal transit constipation, you have to see whether you can try any of these drugs, and any psychological stress is there that has to be addressed. If there is a slow transit constipation, adding a prokinetic like 5-HT4 agonist prucalopride will definitely help. Okay. This is in general a few key points. I have put it in few slides that would have added to you. Shall we move to fecal incontinence?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. So fecal incontinence, see, this is very much underreported and undertreated. Two things, because of the stigma, and why undertreated. Even doctors are hesitant to treat and quite not aware how to go about. And in India, it is still lot stigma. They come in late stages. So you should know Dr. Satish S.C. Rao. He has written The Fecal Incontinence in Schlesinger. I had an opportunity to interact with him 3-4 times. So he's a very good guy, and you should be aware of this guy. He is the one who coined the term neurogastroenterology, and he was the editor of Neurogastroenterology Journal. And he has made a significant contribution in this field, and his concepts are very clear. So how do you define incontinence? Is defined as involuntary leakage of fecal matter through anus, or inability to control the discharge of bowel contents. The prevalence is disproportionately higher in the middle-aged women, older adults, and nursing home residents. This frequency of fecal incontinence increases with age. It might be 7% in younger women, which increases up to 30% in the 70 decade. So to know what is the depth or the burden of the disease, nearly $1.8 billion has spent on diapers, in adult diapers in USA alone. And if you think of India, where they're hesitant and they don't use the diapers, it is definitely underreported. Fecal incontinence has a significant important impact on quality of life, including loss of self-respect, confidence, modesty, along with embarrassment and social stigma. So, how a typical case present to you? This is this is often you get to see in your clinical practice once you start. Elderly female brought by her first degree relatives with decreased food intake and altered behavior. Decreased food intake because they take more, they have to pass stools more, and they'll complain of dyspepsia just to tell the family members why they are not eating, and loose stools. It is always confused as loose stools. They don't come to you as incontinence, and they would have visited few doctors. They would have done few tests and said nothing is there, and unless they would have done at least a PR examination to note the tone, it wouldn't have diagnosed. Okay, it's often even missed by a busy gastroenterologist who failed to do a PR examination. So you have to make sure that a PR examination is must. And as per Dr. Satish, PR examination will, you can diagnose incontinence in 100% of the cases. And you have passive incontinence, urge incontinence, and fecal seepage. These are the three types. Most common you see is passive and urge. Passive is involuntary passage of the fecal matter where you are not aware. So there is a sensory defect is there. Urge is where the fecal matter and flatus, despite active attempt to retain the contents, you pass. And fecal seepage is an undecided leakage after one stool episode of defecation. After a bowel movement you see, but in between there will be a normal. So these patients sometimes complain that they go twice or thrice to toilet in a frequent interval in the morning. So what abnormal, what are the causes? This is from the Schlesinger. So just you need to understand few things. Anything, it can be divided into structural or some functional things which causes. Functional means more of neurological. So in the structural, patient who has undergone hemorrhoidectomy, neuropathy or obstetric injury, these are the patients. It is noted in the patient who undergoes normal delivery, nearly 35% of them have the injury of the sphincter. Often they might not be symptomatic. And puborectalis muscle will be involved with aging, excessive perineal descent or trauma. Pudendal nerve will be damaged in excessive training. I told you pudendal nerve supplies the external anal sphincter. That's why it is important. Obstetric or surgical injury or perineal descent. And there might be avulsion injury, diabetes, head injury. All this can damage the nervous system, spinal cord and anus. This lead to impaired sensation and cause incontinence or a decrease in the anal tone. Rectum can be involved in IBD, IBS. It's more common in a IBD proctitis, where you tend to see that the lower rectum is involved. Their patient might have little incontinence. And abnormal pelvic floor function you get to see in ANS, CNS disorders and obstetric injury, and even with fecal impaction. I told you in children how does it affect. They have encoparesis that sometimes can be confused for incontinence. Altered stool characteristic like bile acid malabsorption or any diarrhea for that matter can cause incontinence, especially in the extremes of age. So in these cases, it is very much important you treat the diarrhea before treating the incontinence. And other causes are aging, dementia, psychological or psychiatric patients. They can present usually what we call Munchausen syndrome, where we had a couple of children usually brought by parents that he's having diarrhea or incontinence. What they used to do is they have to fill the rectum with a tube with water, and then they used to pass stools. So they used to say he's having stool or incontinence. And they used to come for the benefit of insurance or other purpose or other gains. So most common cause is anal sphincter dysfunction seen in elderly. they can overlap, and that accounts for nearly 70% of these. And to assess the severity of incontinence, you have various scales. This you can keep a screenshot. Fecal incontinence scent marks, fecal incontinence severity index, fecal incontinence severity score, all this. But what you need to remember is modified Cleveland Clinic grading system that has 7 parameters, including the state of stool, degree of alteration in lifestyle, and the need to wear a pad, and antidiarrheal medications, and ability to defer defecation. So all these are considered, and the degree of defecation or efficacy of therapy also can be assessed using this grading. The total score ranges from 0 to 24. So this is a question for you. Try to make an attempt. 60-year-old woman with past history of depression on fluoxetine represent to your clinic with fecal incontinence. She feels the urge to defecate, has to run to bathroom, but frequently does not make it. Her stools are liquid in consistency, causes her great embarrassment, and limits her outings. Her primary care physician have performed stool studies were negative. Her physical examination, no abdominal tenderness. She has lost 5 pounds. Her stools were formed prior to last 3 months. She did not had any incontinence. What is the next most appropriate therapy?
Colonoscopy.
Colonoscopy. Why?
Associated, sir, these loose motions. So there's a diarrhea that has to be
Yes.
removed.
Yeah, very good. It's a diarrhea associated, as I mentioned, diarrhea associated incontinence. You have to rule out why the diarrhea is due to, because something like fluoxetine or a long-term PPI causes lymphocytic or collagenous microscopic colitis, to be more broader term. So you have to rule out that, and you have to take colonic biopsy and to rule out it. So colonoscopy and biopsy is the ideal option. So, and a few points which I wanted to tell: if diarrhea is coexistent, you have to perform and rule out what is the cause of diarrhea. And one more is anal cushion, which I not mentioned initially, also puts a pressure around 9 mm of Hg and contribute to 10 to 20% of rectal aning pressure. So as the age advances, this anal cushion, which is the fat content, might reduce, and this 10 to 20% will be taken out of the equation. So this is also important why it occurs in elderly. So what are the diagnostic tests which is being done is anorectal manometry, which we discussed, where you can assess whether the internal or external. When you measure at rest, it represents the internal anal sphincter pressure, because that contributes to around 60 to 70%. Whereas when you ask the patient to actively squeeze, it represents the external anal sphincter pressure. So anal rectum manometry will be able to tell us whether the sphincter is weak or not. There is a new thing. I'll just show the picture to you. EndoFlip, and which is in a pilot study in India now. And we have this functional study. EMGs are not done. What we do is pudendal nerve terminal motor latency. Usually they do it this as before surgery to assess, because if there is a defect and neuropathy, doing surgery might not help. So you have to make sure that there is no neuropathy. So this PNT-ML should usually considered before subjecting the patient for surgery in case of any defect. And TAMS, that is trans-lumbosacral anorectal magnetic stimulation, which are non-invasive test, which also gives how is the nerve conduction, and sometimes they'll be used as a mode of bridging in the treatment. So what we need to concentrate are manometry and EndoFlip and pudendal nerve terminal motor latency and TAMS. Balloon expulsion test, it is the same test which I discussed with you before. So here the balloon patient won't be able to hold it, or sometimes there won't be any pressure from the rectum because of the neuropathy, rectum won't be able to contract. So in this, barium enema is not recommended as a mode of modality now, because it might not give us any clue about the anatomy or the functional. See, any investigation here you are doing here either should give an anatomical detail, whether there is a tear which has happened that gives us a clue and go in and operate. Second, it should give us a pressure gradient, how is the function, whether the anal canal is able to contract or not. If it's not, then it is not going to be useful. Barium enema in that way will not going to help us, even abdominal X-ray for that matter. Endoscopy will be indicated in those with associated diarrhea and those with more than 50 years where you want to rule out incontinence. Sometimes the presence of a villus adenoma in rectum or the proctitis can mimic this fecal incontinence. So this is your question. 50-year-old woman present to clinic with fecal incontinence. She had 2 previous vaginal deliveries at the age of 28 and 33. One was forceps with injury requiring suturing, and she also had history of hemorrhoid requiring hemorrhoidectomy. Which of the following is least helpful? We just discussed.
Barium.
Yeah, barium enema. So this is how rectal manometry looks. So this is not endoflip. This is manometry. So what we saw in the previous was, this is 2-dimensional. This is more like a 3-dimensional. It's just the same thing with more sensors, which is reconstructed in a 3D, which looks better on a computer screen. And this is the details. In a 3D, you have 256 circumferentially arranged sensor in a 5 centimeter probe, and also being used in many laboratories, but most of it as a research purpose. So this endoflip, this is in a trial phase now, which we use in GE junction before and after POEM to assess the response, in the pylorus to know the pyloric tone, and also in the flip means functional luminal imaging probe, I forgot to mention, and also in the rectum to know the fecal incontinence. You see, this is the pressure will be mentioned with color here, and this is a normal subject at rest and during squeeze in a healthy subject. Whereas with fecal incontinence, this is how it will be. It will be, the pressure is low even in the lower rectum, anus, even during the squeeze. This is how it will show the grading. Supposedly better modality than manometer, but still needs evaluation. So rectal sensory testing, predominantly we test by balloon expulsion test. What we do is we ask these following questions to the patient: when they feel the first perception, first desire to defecate, urgent desire to defecate, and volume required for partial or complete inhibition of anal sphincter tone. So first perception in a normal individual is around 50 ml. First desire to defecate is somewhere between 150 to 200. Urgent desire beyond 300 ml. And volume required, that is depends on individual, usually around 150 to 200. That's where that inhibition of anal sphincter tone occurs. Most patients with fecal incontinence have little or no difficulty with evacuation, but patient with fecal seepage will have difficulty in expulsion. So this is endosonography. US, which you are seeing internal anal sphincter, external anal sphincter. This is a normal one. This is a patient where you have a defect somewhere between 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. There is a defect in the sphincter. It is there both with the internal and external. So this is what I mentioned. After normal vaginal delivery, anal endosonography revealed occult sphincter injury in 35% of the women, whereas sphincter defect were detected in 85% of the women with third degree perineal tear compared to 33% without tear. So MRI, does MRI helpful? Yes, in selected cases, but in as a gastroenterologist and even to assess a surgeon, US is preferred to assess the structure, and we can able to differentiate internal and external more better way than MRI. Whereas MRI gives help us to know whether there is a atrophy or no atrophy, and also if you want to see whether the perineal descent and all, which is not possible with US, difficography is preferred, where 150 ml of contrast material is placed into the rectum and subject is asked to squeeze or sometimes cough to see whether there is a urge incontinence, or to know the where is indirect or reflex contraction of external anal sphincter during cough will occur. To assess that, you can do this. And also to confirm the occurrence of incontinence at rest and during coughing, it is useful for demonstrating rectal prolapse and poor rectal evacuation. So the treatment, you have, the goal is to restore incontinence if possible and improve the quality of life. You have supportive and specific treatment. Supportive, avoid offending foods, ritualizing the food habits, improving skin hygiene, instituting lifestyle changes, like you can have a proper training every 2 hourly. You can ask them to evacuate as much as possible, and hygienic measures including wiping the perianal area with wet moist tissues, and also help in uh, using sometimes what do you say, freshness or the deodorant specifically. This is more for a westernized society, and reducing caffeine and fiber intake will help, and eliminating lactose also and fructose will help in few patients, which increases the frequency of stool. And in specific therapy, you have pharmacological, biofeedback, and others. Pharmacological, what we commonly use is loperamide. Diphenoxylate, sodium, and atropine often not used because of the side effect profile. Clonidine is being mentioned, but we don't use in a clinical practice. Allocetrane is adjuvant, but because of the chance of associated constipation, it is avoided. And in females, estrogen replacement therapy is known to help. Amitriptyline can be used when there is an incontinence without evidence of any structural defect or neuropathy. And mind you, surgery should not be considered in the presence of neuropathy. Biofeedback, it's a mainly operant conditioning. I told you how we do a biofeedback, and usually in the absence of neuropathy, it has a good outcome. Poor outcome in those with neuropathy, incontinence, and underlying neurological disorders. And others, we use the sphincter bulking agents like a autologous fat from the same individual. The fat, I told you, the perianal fat will be reduced, that we try to um, use, and glutathione treated collagen or synthetic macromolecules. Rarely we use the plugs, but not practical, and electrical stimulation is used to an extent. So, question for you, the manometric parameters obtained at baseline will appear to predict the clinical response to biofeedback therapy. That the question meant to say that if we have very low tone, that has poor response. Relatively better tone has a good response.
False.
You want false, exactly. So it doesn't have any saying on that, because only with giving biofeedback and assessing later only you will be retrospectively able to tell. So answer came, neuromuscular biofeedback will help to improve the anal sphincter muscle strength, improve the coordination between the muscles, enhance the anorectal sensory perception, but it does not reverses neuropathic changes. It's often a contraindication. So can you identify the device? So this is sacral nerve stimulator from Schlesinger itself. It has two phases. This is used to bring the tone by stimulating the nerve. So this percutaneous tibial nerve stimulation, it has not been proven, whereas sacral nerve stimulator, it has a benefit in few selected patients. So first what they do is in the first trial phase, 2 weeks, electrodes they implant in second and third sacral nerve roots and nerves are stimulated. If the patient shows any improvement, then the permanent neurostimulator will be placed in these patients. If they don't show any improvement, unlikely it is going to benefit and it will not be used. Surgery, whenever there is tear secondary to obstetric injury or any other surgery, doing surgery to repair has a good result. Surgery in the presence of neuropathy does not give a good result. Most of the surgical measures are injection of dextrans beads, anal sphincter repair have a good or fair result, and even sacral nerve stimulation. Rest of the surgeries does not have a good quality of evidence. Only thing I felt you need to know in the others was one named procedure called SECA procedure, which is a radio frequency therapy. So what I mentioned, these three as fair and good result. Colostomy, again in a refractory cases, can be considered safe but aesthetically less preferable. It is particularly suitable for patients with spinal cord injury, immobilized patient, and those with severe skin problems or other complication. Colostomy should not be regarded as a failure of therapy. It should be considered as a form of therapy in a refractory cases. So just briefly to summarize before we take up MCQs. So with a patient with incontinence, you suspect a prolapse, treat it. If you not confirm, again you can confirm using difficography and MRI, treat with surgery. Local problems, you have to treat accordingly. That we'll discuss. There is a separate chapter. And if there is a diarrhea with incontinence, always treat diarrhea. Then also, if not improving, then evaluate. Then if the patient has history of injury, you can evaluate with manometry for pressure, endosonography for structure damage, balloon for functional assessment, neurophysiology plus or minus, we can do it. If you see dysenergification, it is biofeedback therapy. If there is an impaired sensation, you can still do biofeedback therapy, but results are not good. And if there is a decreased rectal reservoir, you can do rectal augmentation surgery. If you have weak sphincter, no neuropathy, biofeedback. If there is a neuropathy, then you have to do translumbar neuromodulation therapy with biofeedback. Surgery might not help when with the neuropathy. Without neuropathy, you have multiple options, including sphincteroplasty, sphincter repair, sphincter sacral nerve stimulation, and later stages colostomy. So in India, we don't have a protocol of our own because still considered stigma. This is Western protocol. So these two things, with neuropathy, without neuropathy, you need to remember. So in the 11th edition, there is a home biofeedback system which is being mentioned, like it's a mechanical resistance training of the anal sphincter with a self-titrating inflation balloon and gradual escalation. This we don't have much idea, but it is being mentioned. You should know, you should have an idea. And encircling magnetic leads, just like in a G junction, in the refractory GERD where magnetic leads are used, this can be used. So question is, electrical stimulation of skeletal muscle for fecal incontinence result in increase in muscle strength, increase in conduction, increase in size of motor units, neuronal sprouting from local blood flow. Anyone want to take a guess?
So E, all of the above.
Yes. So electrical stimulation will help in increasing strength, conduction, size, and increase in size of units, and neuronal sprouting. So this is one more question. 75-year-old woman with poorly controlled diabetes resides in a nursing home, presents to OPD with fecal soiling. She does not have any strong urge to defecate, and nursing staff provided her with adult diaper. She has chronic low back pain requiring narcotics. She feels like she has a great difficulty having a regular bowel movement due to hard stool. She does not have any blood in her stools, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and weight loss. She has history of 3 vaginal deliveries. Which of the following is least likely contributing factor? Diabetes, impaired sensation, hard stools, IBS, sphincter trauma.
The D, IBS.
Yes, IBS will not have any effect. All other in this patient will have an effect on her or her symptoms. So next patient is 55-year-old woman with stool incontinence is found to have weak anal sphincters on manometry. Further testing reveals no sensory abnormalities. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step?
The biofeedback C.
Yes, very good. So weak anal sphincter on manometry, no sensory means with nerve intact. The best thing is biofeedback therapy. So next question is 80-year-old woman present with complaints of semi-formed stools with fecal incontinence, underwent colonoscopy with biopsies, every evaluation was negative, and which of the following pharmacological therapy as a first therapeutic step? So this is a patient with a proper incontinence without any structural damage and no diarrhea. What is your first pharmacological therapy?
Loperamide B.
Yeah, very good. Others have side effect profile. Tocosate and magnesium citrate, we use it to induce diarrhea, so it won't be helpful. That's all. I hope it was of help to you. Any suggestion, anything you want to give feedback?
Sir, this what is the difference between rectoanal inhibitory reflex and rectoanal contractile reflex?
Rectoanal contractile reflex. The contractile is the contractile reflex. See, rectoanal
contractile response.
Is it you mean by that cutaneous stimulation which causes the contraction? Rectoanal inhibitory is when you stimulate the rectum, there will be relaxation of the anus. Contractile response is when you stimulate the perianal area, you get the contraction.
So that has got no role in maintaining this continence actually.
As a part of continence, I'm not sure. It is not being mentioned. You have come across that anywhere?
So yes, sir. In Schlesinger only, sir.
What does it say?
So this rectoanal contractile response is a subconscious reflex to prevent release of rectal contents such as flatus. It involves external anal sphincter and is mediated by pelvic, splanchnic, and pudendal nerve.
Yeah, that's what I said. Same thing, but I don't think it will help. How we can use clinically to bring the continence.
Right, sir. Only RAIR is plotted so that manometrically. This is not there.
No. This is not there.
Right, sir.
Any other doubts? These two are very, vague and not very much interesting topics. To put it across is and you don't feel like reading also these chapters. You should be very much. You get disinterested. I try to make it little interested as possible. If there is anything you want to add on, give a feedback or any doubts, you can ask me. Is this okay?
Yes,